Welcome to Pagan Coffee Talk. If you enjoy our content, please consider donating and following our socials. Now, here are your hosts, Lady Alba and Lord Knight.
Okay, I'm recording now, Lord Knight. Are you happy?
Yes.
I failed to hit the record button, so I was being given shit because we started talking about the topic. Okay. All right, matriarchy versus patriarchy. I mean, it's not really versus. It's more just what is the difference? What are they?
What's one versus the other?
Which one you want to start with, the mamas or the papas?
Let's start with the mamas. Let's start where it all started, with the mamas.
All right. So, a matriarchal society, or a matriarchy, is simply the understanding that life begins with a woman, life comes from a woman, and therefore the society in question honors and recognizes the mother, the line of women, as sacred.
And their authority thereof.
Yes, their authority is at the top and is in most cases, right, adhered to. There is knowledge that comes down from them. Laws come down from them. If there are disputes, they are who resolves the issue. Okay, so matriarchal societies, many ancient, prehistoric, tribal societies have been or are matriarchal. In modern, it kind of sucks because our only modern examples are kind of fantasy based.
Yes.
Wonder Woman.
Right.
Right. She came from the tribe of Amazons.
Right. This is...
Yeah.
Matriarchy turned up to 11.
Correct. Yeah, because there were no men at all.
Which
brings up other questions entirely. But yeah, there were no dudes. But yes, so in a matriarchy, now here's where it gets interesting. Does it mean that men are substandard, subservient, less important?
Right.
No. I don't believe so.
I don't believe it.
I think it's simply a matter of understanding that if we want to dumb it down into the simplest forms, in a matriarchal society, if a child asks a question, the number one answer they hear is, go ask your mother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yes. She has the ultimate say.
All right. Which in most ancient households, who ran them households?
Well, but let's think about why. In most matriarchal societies, the women were considered the spiritual leaders, the seers, the knowledge passers.
Exactly.
But why? Because the men were out doing what?
Men things.
Well, they were hunting. They were building.
They were farming.
They were using their physical attributes to uphold the society and to contribute. So women were using their attributes, which was basically communication, storytelling. Yeah, those were their skills in kind. Now, it's not to say that there weren't exceptions. It's not to say that women didn't also do physical labor.
Right.
But realistically, again, just the physical differences between men and women, they did less of it. And a lot of their jobs, which revolved around child rearing, cooking, cleaning, organizing, things that are more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're more group oriented, right? Hunting isn't necessarily a group sport.
No.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
No. A lot of the things that men did, they were small groups,
right?
Not large. The women would get together as a large mass to accomplish a task or to do things.
But this is where we start getting these behaviors that we still do today, that are imprinted to where in the world men want to protect women.
Well, that's some of it, but I mean, honestly, a lot of it too just comes down to basic differences. My daughter and I had a really funny conversation not that long ago, okay, where I said something about her and her partner, and whatever I said came down to something similar to that. And she looked at me and she goes, this is adorable now. She goes, I don't mean to disappoint you, but we don't adhere to those traditional, those traditional gender roles. Now, here's what I need everyone to envision. My daughter is all of 5'2" and weighs about 120 pounds at best. Her partner is well over 6 foot and is a very, very large man. Okay. He's a very large, imposing figure. So, but he's a sweetheart. But while she said these words, I looked in his direction and he shook his head so vigorously. And what he was telling me, and it made me laugh because without her seeing it, what he was telling me is, I would push her aside and get hit by a train before she did. Because at the end of the day, he knows it's not a matter of gender roles. It's what's capable.
Exactly.
Yeah. Men have the physical ability to throw further, punch harder,
work longer.
Yeah, it's muscle mass and design. So while she thinks, they're very, gender pro, whatever
I find this funny,
is
we do have people going around, they don't think they're doing these gender roles,
but they are. But they are, because at the end of the day, it's instinct. It is biologically imprinted in us.
Exactly.
To go women and children first.
Mm-hmm.
It just is what it is.
Really, honestly and truly, if you want, I never actually thought it was ever 100% matriarchy or patriarchy.
I didn't either. I mean, one of my funniest stories of this is I knew someone who was a police officer who was female, and I was friends with the guy that she was dating.
Right.
And he told me this really hilarious story where it was late at night. They were both in bed, they were naked, and they heard a noise in the house. So he jumps up, right?
Right.
And he is fully nude, and she just whispers, "What are you doing?" And as she does this, he hears the gun cock, right? And he goes, "What do you mean? I'm going to go check it out." She goes, "You're butt naked." He goes, "So are you." She goes, "Yes, but I have a weapon."
Who's trained to use this?
Exactly. So he goes, "I've never felt less like a man in my life," because she was absolutely correct. Not only did she have the weapon, but she's trained to use the weapon. So he goes, "Yeah," and I thought that was hysterical, but under the circumstance, made perfect sense.
Who's best qualified?
Right. She's like, "We're both naked anyway. That alone is going to give somebody pause."
And I can use that pause.
Exactly. But yes, in many instances, these are just, I don't know, there's just things that I think we do biologically that we don't even really think about. They just happen.
Even me being in a relationship with another man, I see me and Lord Oswin doing the same thing.
Of course.
All the time.
Mm-hmm. There's always that kind of push and pull based on, especially in a relationship, right? People's strengths or weaknesses. Always. But yeah, big picture, from a societal standpoint, these are the things that tend to happen. Now, okay, so that we've defined the matriarchal. Right. So the patriarchal is the exact same thing, only
men.
Right. Men are the end all be all. They answer things. They effectively run the show. Modern society, if we look at it from a government standpoint, shall we say?
All right.
It's primarily patriarchal.
Yeah.
It's shifting slightly. Yes. It's getting there. But, there is an irony in, we can use Great Britain as an example, right?
Right.
So the monarchy, the name tells you right there.
Right.
It's the monarchy is matriarchal. We had a queen, right? For however long she was on the throne, which at that point made it by default a matriarchy because she was the queen.
She was the queen.
But Parliament, right, which is the actual governing body of the land,
is made up mostly men.
Yeah. So for a long time, there was a really interesting sort of push and pull there. And it actually, I thought, led to a better balance.
Yeah.
It was really interesting when Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister, and then we had a female queen, we had a female effectively president, prime minister, whatever.
Right.
Yeah. But you still had a whole bunch of men involved. Patriarchal, however, a lot of religions are patriarchal. There's a lot of organizations.
Yes.
Right. A lot of societies.
So now these men's club and stuff like that. Well, back in the day, were like, what is it? The Shriners.
You've got the Shriners. You've got the Freemasons. You have, oh boy, there's a lot. So
now, as long as women would want to get together and do a group just for women, you ain't got a problem with this.
So, here's what's funny. Like, if we look at the Freemasons forever and a day, right? It was a men's club. And that was actually one of their tenets. There are no women. Until a very well-off wife of a Mason and someone who is extremely involved in the Masonic community said, I think the women need our own. And he went, ruh-roh. And she got together with a bunch of the other wives and founded what is now known as the Order of the Southern Star.
Exactly.
Which is the female version of Freemasonry. In fact, what's really interesting is when you look at Washington, D.C., which was largely built by the Masons.
Yeah.
And, you have a lot of the founding fathers who were Masons. We see the whole of the Capitol as sort of a Masonic tribute almost. But the building that housed and still does, I believe, the original housing of the Order of the Southern Star is a historic monument unto itself. And it's a bigger deal is made about it because it was a group of women who effectively went, we want our version as well. And they wanted that equality. So, yeah.
Ta-ta-ta-ta.
But that's the thing, is that either of these societies, there has to be room for the other. The problem is just that either is too far in one direction, potentially. I don't understand why we only ever view societies in that way. Why is it only one or the other?
Right. Why can't it be more of a mixed bag?
Yeah. It's dumb. I don't like it. And it creates a lot of animosity. This is where, feminism is born out of the idea of fuck the patriarchy. Well, hang on a second, right?
Hold on. The thing about this, we live in this world because men wanted to make their wives happy.
Do we, though? Explain.
What? No.
What,
No. Over the years, everything we have done is to try our best to improve the lives of our family.
Okay.
By improving making your lives easier as much as we can, so you have continued food, power, and we built this whole entire world.
But that's the difference, right, between modern and ancient.
Right.
So ancient, yes, I agree with you. But modern, there's a problem there, because modern, it really has become about a power play. How do we exert dominance
over the other?
Right, over one aspect of society than the other. And there's the problem. I mean, the whole, women's right to vote and, all this other bizarre shit. Like, at some point, we shifted from women have their own strengths to they're the weaker. And we must protect them. We must shelter them, right? They're the weaker sex. They don't
need to be as educated.
I mean, come on.
This
fainting couches were exclusively built for women, right? Because their sensibilities, they couldn't be exposed. Bad news would make them faint. And I'm like, what?
But it wasn't the bad news that made them faint. It's them girdles that they did in the stomach that restricted their breathing so much.
But yes and no, because I feel like society conforms, right?
Right.
The idea is if you take a little girl and you show her that she can do things that men can do, and you give her the tools and the skills and the ability, she will not be squeamish about cutting the head off of a fish or, gutting an animal or whatever it is. But Victorian society, modern, right, as we started to move into the industrial age, women became sheltered from all of that.
Right,
so
they became too over-sheltered.
Yes, so the expectation was you're supposed to faint at the sight of blood. You're supposed to not know how to handle overly emotional news. You're supposed to not be, and so they conformed. And that therein lies the problem.
But yet, just a few generations before, you had women going out in the yard cutting off
savages. Right, absolute savages, uncivilized. Yeah, but that's the problem. Society makes up the rules as it goes. It's always changing. It's always evolving. We're seeing it right now. It's why there's so much turmoil in our country, because people are deciding on the fly what society should and should not be allowing. And previous generations are going, what? When did this happen? How did we get here? Well, it doesn't matter how we got here, Grandpa. We're here, so
we're here, and you're
conform.
Not allowed. And you're not allowed to do that anymore.
Right, exactly. So stop using that word. Stop saying that thing. Stop doing that thing, because this is it. Goodness gravy, dog. What's happening?
He didn't get his lunch.
Oh. So, yeah. But we have always strived for something a bit more balanced. However, craft as its center is matriarchal.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's called goddess worship for a reason. Yeah. Now, again, though, when we talk about maiden, mother, and crone, when we talk about the aspect of three, when we liken that to, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, we have two halves of one coin.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just a matter of, are we striving to find the balance in both of them? Or are we leaning one or the other?
And are we just being too angry at something we don't actually have any control over?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. So. But yeah, I'm as surprised as you are that there's still so much confusion over what the differences are between the two. So hopefully that helped to clear it up.
Hopefully.
Yeah. All right, let's get some more coffee before we yammer on.
All right. Now that we've got our technical issues covered, I think.
Maybe.
Maybe. We'll see. So, you wanted to talk about spells. I don't know if we can really cover anything new about spells. It seems like everybody's talked about spells throughout the years. And
well, we're not big on talking about spells to begin with.
No, we're not.
A little asinine to us to a certain extent, but
right.
I mean, spells exist, and as a spiritual leader or somebody like that, people are going to come to you eventually and go, hey, I cast this spell and this is what happened. What do I do to fix it?
Right.
And I'm sorry, if you don't understand what it is that these people did, it's hard to help them figure out a way to get out. Now, first of all, if you cast a spell and it backfires or blows up in your face, I'm sorry, that's just you. It's not me. It's not that you did the spell wrong. It's just you're not quite sure what it is that you really wanted to begin with. Wouldn't you say?
Okay. Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, that most of what we hear about backlashes aren't backlashes. They're just unintended consequences to what we're doing.
Yeah, spells tend to take a life of their own after a while.
There's a bunch of different styles of spells, and that's really what we're talking about today, right?
Oh, okay. So styles. Okay.
Styles, okay? So like to start off with, like witches' ladders. All right. You remember these. They were actually popular back in the day. A coven
They
would get
were,
together.
yeah.
A witch's ladder was nothing more than cord magic done a little bit differently, except you would tie objects into the cord.
Right.
You know, a feather or a crystal or something like that. The idea here is that the spells sort of read like a sentence. Each item stacked onto another one to create the whole entire spell.
Right.
So witch's ladder, if you think about it, is more like a sentence itself as the spell. And tying each one in adds a little bit extra or defines the spell a little bit more as you go along.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, and then there was any number of things you could do with it after you were done. You could hang it somewhere. You could bury it. You could,
Well,
any
of
number
course,
of things you could do.
you could always make it more complicated using certain cord colors and certain
yeah.
things. And of course, then you're sitting there and why in the world you're, braiding it and all this, you're doing chants and other things on top of it.
Right. Right.
So it's not like you can't make this thing more complicated.
Oh God, no! You can blow it up as much as you want.
The reason we got the witch's ladder is because of what we refer to as cord magic.
Right.
Cord magic back in the day was done like this. You would go outside and you would take a cord that was like 9 inches long or so, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on a really windy day, you would go outside, and when the wind would gust, you would just sit there and tie a knot.
Right.
And you would tie, and then when the wind gusts again, you would tie another knot. And you would keep on doing that till you, on average, you had about 7 knots in this, right?
Yep.
I think on average that 7 was about the easiest one you could get. Well, sailors would do this because the idea would be when you were out at sea and there was no wind, you'd untie a knot. It would untie the wind you tied in the knot. Depending on how much wind you wanted, you would untie so many knots. So if you just want a breeze, you would just untie 1 knot. If you want more of a gust, you have to untie 2. If you want a whole entire gale, you have to untie all of them at the same time.
Right, and I believe it's also where the speed in knots comes from.
Yeah,
essentially. So if you untied 3 knots, you were going at 3 knots.
3 knots. Well, see, this also leads into the logic of what we refer to as knot magic.
Right.
The idea is that you can tie certain energies into a knot. Hence the reason why most witches will not untie any knot tied by somebody else.
Right.
Even if you didn't mean to put a curse into it, you might have been a little bit more aggravated or anything like that. The thought is if you untie that comes into your sphere of influence then.
Right. If there's the slightest chance that there's even the littlest bit of energy in that knot, we're not going to touch it.
We're not going to touch it. All right. I mean, this extends to where we get the whole entire concepts of the love knots that Celtic women used to wear. They would braid their hair to where it would go over one shoulder or the other one. And one way you were married, one shoulder you weren't married. It was sort of like doing the ring things to let people know who was married and who wasn't.
Right.
Who was good to flirt with and who you had to be careful.
Right.
But again, that knot magic goes all the way up into even what we refer to as hair.
Mm-hmm.
So those twisted, braided knots that people do to their hair, that's still some form of magic to some extent.
Right.
Then we have what the witch jars.
Oh yes, the lovely witch jars.
All right, witch jars or witch boxes, because before we had jars, we used boxes. All right, I mean, these are often seen, especially when you're doing like the crossroads stuff. You put everything into a box and put it in there. Because again, the concept of using jars and boxes is you want to contain the spell in a certain spot.
Right. I mean, essentially you can use anything, but you really do need it to be more impenetrable than anything else. So like a cloth bag might not be the best thing for these.
Well, again, most of these were used as types of curses.
Right.
Urine, blood, all this other stuff in there, and then you would bury it under their enemies or the person you want revenge on doorstep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The idea is to keep the magic close to that person.
Exactly.
All right. And notice all these spells still keep on doing the same thing. They require your attention at some point during the day.
Right.
All right. Again, witches' ladders, you're going to hang them by a door. You're going to see them every time you go out to remember that you cast that spell in the back of your mind.
Mm.
All right. But most of these spells are, like I said, the drawing is to contain spells in a certain area, not to let them go wild. Kind of like putting your dog in a fence.
Right.
Then we have candle magic, which then brings in like color magic, depending on the color of the candle. Of course, you can always still dress them by rubbing oils and stuff on there. You can even take it up a notch and start making the candle yourself. And as you're making the candle for specific spells, you're doing chants and stuff like that. Right. Adding herbs and other things into the candles to help boost it up.
Right. Sort of. Inscribing runes and whatever else you.
Right. There's one that I remember that we used to do a lot, where you would cut notches into a tapered candle and only burn so much of the candle each day for like 7 days.
Right. You essentially turn it into a 7-day candle.
All right. So again, candle magic is pretty straightforward, I think. It's less about containing magic and more about letting it run free.
Letting it go.
Letting it go.
But again, candle magic, you can make it as complicated as you want.
Right. I mean, it's just like, what do they call it? The kitchen witch magic stuff. The idea is the idea is still there that you're cooking with love or you're cooking with certain emotions behind to cast that spell on the food to help out. But then when you're eating food and you're dealing with your family, you got to deal with that whole entire messing with other people's wheels.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could do something as simple as, doing a spell to aid in digestion.
Right. Or, or to calm people. If everybody's been in a fight, to calm people down so you can talk through the problem.
Kind of rule those emotions for a time period. Yeah.
Right. Because the majority of the people that do these where they're cleansing because people are fighting in the house and stuff like that, they cleanse it. Then they don't sit down and actually go through the problem that started the conflict to begin with.
Right.
We got rid of all the bad feelings and stuff, so we're just going to ignore it and keep on going. We're not going to sit down and actually discuss it after we got everybody calm.
You put the Band-Aid on it, but you didn't seal the wound. It's still bleeding.
Still bleeding. Like the main style of like spells I like to use is like using bird seeds.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Because I'll take a bird seed and I will go outside and do like they do the sand painting pictures type things.
Oh, yeah.
But with bird seeds, and you're just making a symbol to represent your spell. Right. Charging it up, doing what you got to, and then you walk off. Well, the idea here is that the seeds are either going to be carried off by birds, taking the spell where it needs to go.
Right.
Or the seeds are actually going to plant there and grow, releasing the spell even more. You're feeding the birds, plus
yeah,
doing a spell. Again, casting spells should not be I don't think they should be very complicated. The simpler, the better. The more feel you have to it, the better they tend to be.
Yeah, I can certainly agree with that. I think the simpler it is, the easier it is to really focus on what you're doing, on your intent.
Right.
As opposed to focusing on all the extra stuff that I need to go gather this up. I need to do this at a certain time. I need to do that. And that's taken away from your focus.
Right. I mean, like you're doing, like when we do the poppets, literally we have to treat the poppets as if they are living, breathing beings.
Yes.
All right. I mean, technically, yes, we're causing ourselves to be a psychosis. We're literally doing that. What you see, the homeless lady carrying the baby doll around thinking it's a real doll. We're literally doing this on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike her, who's not, but
right.
But again, to get that connection, again, if you're using a puppet, even to do a curse, I mean, I know a lot of people are going to get mad about this, but the idea is if this was that person in front of them, you'll just rip the damn doll apart.
Right.
To where in the world, if that person was literally there in front of you, you would physically hurt them during this spell casting. And that's what is hard to get people to understand is if we have to do that for a curse, we also have to do the exact same level of energy or emotion, even on the positive spells.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. But that ain't what people are wanting to do. They want to be a little bit more humdrum about it. You have to cast spells. You literally have to throw yourself into this.
Well, I mean, you can just look at the Witch's Pyramid and, I mean, that says it right there.
Right. I mean, hence the reason why in the world it's not our first toolbox thing that we pull out. All right. Because it does put a lot of emotional stress, psychological stress on the caster itself.
It can, yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Now, again, if you're doing it, and if you're doing the whole spell a day thing, I'm sorry. It just seems like these things would wind up canceling each other out after a while.
Well, I guess it depends on what you're actually casting.
True.
But if you're doing a spell a day,
but if you're casting a spell,
you're going to run out of stuff.
Are you casting a spell just to get a glass of water? I mean,
right.
At some point, I'm like, why?
Well, that's where we kind of differ from some other folks. Is that it should be a need.
Right.
Right. It should be something, not a want, not some frivolous little thing that you do. We're not Harry Potter.
No.
You know.
No, I am not going to sit here and suggest any parent casts a spell so they can make sure they can find the right toy for their kids during Christmas.
Right.
I mean, you know, I'm sorry. You can look at your kid and go, it just didn't happen. You know, you don't always get everything you want.
You don't, no.
No. I'm trying to think of any other spell styles that I'm not thinking about. Yeah, we know the whole herbalism, chanting, and all that.
Well, I mean, there's incense. You can use incense to cast a spell.
Well, I mean,
get your dry herbs together and use a charcoal briquette. And
I mean, we have binding. We do have binding spells where we can bind people. You can bind people together. You can bind people apart. You can bind people to themselves.
Right. Well, and it doesn't even have to be people. You can just, bind emotions.
Right. Like I tell this mainly to people who have just lost a loved one or something traumatic has happened. Is a typical thing would be to like take your name, write it down on a piece of paper, put it in a jar of water and stick it in the freezer while sitting there saying, freeze the emotion, but not the heart. That way you can sort of freeze your emotions temporarily so you can get through what you need to and then unfrost later so you can deal with the tragedy, the emotional later.
Yeah. The only problem with that is you got to remember to unfreeze that jar.
Yeah. I mean, so again, when we sit here talk about different styles of spells, sometimes you need to think about why you want to use this specific style. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Because that often lends to how the spell's going to work too. Using some type of cord magic where a witch's bottle would be better because you want to contain it, or two different. Are you with me? Even though both of them contain, but one sort of leaks out over time, the other one just sort of hangs on.
Right.
So again, you have to think about what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it and what style would be best to help you achieve your goal.
And back to something you said earlier. So how does that help us understanding all of this? How does that help us when somebody says, well, I cast this spell and I need some help?
Or I cast this healing spell in this witch's jar and buried it underneath my front porch. That's where all the sickness is. And I don't know why in the world my sickness ain't going away, but everybody else in the family is getting it. This is my point. This is where in the world you see these people going, Well, did you really mean to bury it on your own property where everybody's going to be walking over it all the time?
Right.
This is why in the world you need to know this. People are going to come to you and say stuff like this. The lady that wanted the fresh start, so she swept off her freaking front porch and everybody in her family leaves her and she loses her house and living in her car.
Right.
Again, the answer was, how much more of a clean sweep do you want?
Right.
So again, maybe the style of spell, because doing those clean sweeps like that are a little bit too broad of a style of spell to maybe focus your energies where you actually need it.
Right. And if you're doing, if you're doing something like that, you need to be really specific about what it is you want.
And again, I'm back to sometimes the styles of spells do help on what you're doing. All right.
Sure they do.
There are specific reasons we use puppet magic versus anything else on certain occasions, because we just have no other choice. This is the only way to get it done. So again, when you have a problem with the spell, think about the actual style of the spell itself before you and what its intention was. Because, like I said, some spells hold energy, some disperse it, some sort of do a little bit in between, depending on what you're wanting to do.
Is there anything else that somebody might need to take into consideration?
Well, again, the biggest consideration is really understand what it is that you need, not what you want. Do you really want a lover that's, codependent upon you 24/7? Really? Or do you want someone that's going to compliment you and work with you really good? These are the questions you have to ask yourself, because you can't just say, hey, I want this or that. You don't know where it's always going to come from.
All right. So there's something else to consider.
Yeah.
Is the consequences of
again,
what it is you're doing. It's got to come from somewhere.
We've talked about this. If we cast a spell from rain, we know we're taking rain from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no more matter in the world than what there is. So for you to get $20, somebody has to lose $20. There are rules to magic. They do have to follow the rules of nature, just like the rest of us. So that's why in the world there's different styles, because we want magic to do different things at different times. And I don't see a lot of people actually thinking about the style of magic they're doing based on their desire or what they actually need. I could be wrong.
Yeah, just our opinion.
I think that's about it.
Okay, let's go get some coffee.
Yay.
Thanks for listening. Join us next week for another episode. Pagan Coffee Talk is brought to you by Life Temple and Seminary. Please visit us at lifetempleseminary.org for more information, as well as links to our social media: Facebook, Discord, Twitter, YouTube, and Reddit.
We travel down this trodden path, a maze of stone and mire. Just hold my hand as we pass by a sea of blazing pyres. And so it is the end of our days, so walk with me till morning breaks. And so it is the end of our days, so walk with me till morning breaks.